Are you a sucker for suckers? Now, my guess is probably not, but I'd be willing to bet you fish somewhere, be it a river, stream, or lake, where you see plenty of suckers. They share waters with the game fish we love all across the country, but unless you're a musky angler that needs them for live bait, you're probably not heading out specifically to target these lowly bottom feeders with a rod and reel. But there is a contingent of anglers in the U.S. that spends more time casting to suckers than most other species, and this week, we're going to learn what fuels their passion. The answers might just change the way you think about these overlooked fish, or at least get you jazzed to take on a new challenge right in your own backyard. I'm Outdoor Life Fishing Editor Joe Cermele, and this is the Quick Strike Podcast. My friend Tyler Winter is downright obsessed with sucker fishing, okay? And a few years ago, I even questioned myself as I hopped on a flight to Minnesota to spend a few days foregoing pike, smallmouth, walleyes, and all the other cool fish the state has to offer just to chase suckers with Tyler. But it didn't take very much time on the water for me to understand why Tyler devotes so much energy to a fish that, let's call it like it is, most people simply don't care about. It was genuinely eye-opening, and a lot of his drive stems not just from a love of suckers, but native fish in general. Tyler is a staunch advocate for the conservation of all native species, and he's the director of Native Fish for Tomorrow, which is an organization devoted to protecting native fish and their habitats, and their tireless work has already been moving the needle to change perceptions and the rules that govern species like suckers, gar, and bowfin. Now, most notably, Tyler and crew were instrumental in helping craft Minnesota's native fish bill, the first bill in the country to legally separate native rough fish from invasive fish, and they helped push that through to the state Senate. Now, Tyler's passion for suckers is just infectious, and hopefully some of it rubs off on you, because as I can tell you from experience, if you think catching big suckers is easy, you're very wrong. But it is super fun, and if you want a new challenge, his tips will get you on the path to success. So, Tyler, never in my life have I met anybody quite as torn up and obsessed with fishing for suckers as you. And here's what I want to know. Here's how I want to start this. Is there like a one-off sucker experience, like something in your past, some fish you caught, something that happened that like clicked this all for you and made you just go just full-on sucker obsessed?
You know, I think the thing is realizing the diversity of suckers that are out there.
Yeah.
That there are 78 species of suckers across North America. And so you don't ever run out of things to fish for. Right.
This is true. But do you remember your first one? I've known Tyler. I've known for a long time, so I'm busting a little bit. But like, do you remember sucker number one, Tyler?
You know, I remember my first hog sucker.
Okay.
That one was a surprise, and they don't actually get very big, but I knew that they were right under my nose for a long time.
Yeah.
And like had been trying for one, and then I got lucky, and that kind of felt like I had cracked the code a little bit.
Sure.
Because you have to fish to get one of those. You have to fish in about the fastest water you can find.
Right. So speaking to the diversity, right, and you have to do the teaching here. I assume then that like a hog sucker that is a species attracted to fast water, that's not the one you're going to see lollygagging around the deep, slow, pools in the stream.
Exactly. So in the Midwest, we have at least 17 species of suckers, and they divide themselves out by habitat. Some live in lakes, some small streams, some big rivers, the fast part of big rivers, the slow part of big rivers. And so I tend to find the most interesting ones, I think, live in the fastest water and in the big rivers. But
sure.
You'll find different ones all over.
Well, and as we get further along here, I think we'll be able to explain why a sucker that lives in very fast water is even more of a challenge than the slow water fish. But just to back up, so this passion all started for you growing up in southern Minnesota, right?
Yeah, and there we had some ditches and a lot of pretty muddy lakes. And then when I went to college, I took some ichthyology classes and realized that there was a whole bunch of fish out there that were hadn't even caught yet. And the rest is history.
Yeah. Now, you had said there are 78 species of suckers in the United States, right?
At least, actually, I think there's some maybe that aren't even described yet, so that number will probably grow.
Okay, and roughly like now I know they don't exist though in every state in the union, right?
I think some, at least in every state in the union, more diversity in the Mississippi drainage and the East Coast. Mississippi drainage is probably the mecca, but there are some species that are found out west, some species on the Gulf drainage that are not found in other places. So wherever you are, there's probably at least one species. Maybe you don't have 20, but
sure.
There's got to be at least one.
Yeah, but that's my point, that pretty much anybody listening to this, no matter where you live, there's a strong chance that you have the opportunity to target these fish fairly close to home, which, you know, I'm a huge proponent. I preach the importance of fishing in your backyard. Even if your backyard is not great, you have to fall in love with the things in it and explore the things in it. So before we start talking about sort of some misconceptions about suckers and how you actually go about catching these things, start us off with like what made you fall in love, you personally, with catching them? What draws you to this?
You know, well, one part of it is that I live in an urban area. I live in Minnesota, as you know, it's the land of walleye. And if I want to actually like find some decent walleye fishing, I gotta travel, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone wants all the walleyes here, right? I can go to the park right next to my house, and I will have all of those suckers all to myself.
Right.
And I can go out and catch 16 to 20 inch suckers from the bank with my kids all day and don't have to deal with any boats or anybody else.
Sure, sure. And
I've
experienced this with you. I mean, it's a great point. Like we've sucker fished together out your way, and I won't name the river because I know you're still protective of them, even though there's nobody else doing this. I get it. But, you know, you go into it with this mindset of like, all right, this is interesting. Like I've flown all the way out to the Midwest just to go sucker fishing. And then we get to where we're going. And at one point I just sat there and went like, my God, this is such a beautiful river we are on. It is so pristine and so pretty here. And now there are some smallmouth in the river that you took me to. But again, because you're out in Minnesota, right, there's much better smallmouth fishing in much more well-known places, lakes and rivers, big rivers and the big lakes out there, where I imagine you're not really getting that much of a draw to some of these smaller, lesser-known streams for smallmouth. So, like you say, I'm sitting here going, there's nobody around for miles. So that alone, if it's solitude you're looking for, which I think we can both agree is getting harder and harder to find as more people get into fishing, there's an advantage there.
Yeah, you're not going to find it on a cold water stream, and you're not going to find it on a lake.
Yeah.
But you can go to the Mississippi, or you can go to a warm water tributary.
Yeah.
You know, and fish for suckers and challenge yourself. You know, if you get all the easy ones, then, you know, start going for the harder ones. But you won't run out of things to do. And I mean, some of them get huge. You know, the river red horse we were going after get to be 28 inches. I mean, that's steelhead size.
Yeah, exactly. Now let's talk about that. Now it is important for people to understand you might not have 28-inch suckers swimming where you live, but I mean, let's talk a little bit about that potential. Having caught, and look, when I fished with Tyler, I caught what I thought was a big river red horse. According to you, it was an okay one. I mean, and this fish fought every bit as hard as like a big wild brown trout of the same size. It was over 20 inches long.
Oh yeah, it was like 22, 24.
Right. Yeah. But what is the top end growth potential of the biggest ones? Are the river red horse the biggest ones?
River red horse and greater red horse get to be 28, 30 inches long.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's a 10 to 12 pound fish.
Yeah. And this really, I mean, I imagine what you have to do is figure out like sort of what kind of tackle you need to use based on what kind of suckers you have in your area. We were actually using fairly heavy gear, braided line, and fairly heavy rods because we were targeting big fish. But somewhere else maybe that doesn't have these giant red horse, then it becomes like a much more of a light tackle game to really get the most out of these fish. But I can attest to it. You get a big river red horse on your line, that thing rips. Like the drag will spin. They will take you for a ride. So, assuming there's probably a bunch of people listening who have never thought about going rod and reel fishing for suckers specifically, let's start here, man, before we break down how you target these things. What are the biggest misconceptions people have about, just sucker feeding and behavior? I can certainly add mine, but I want to hear it from you first.
I would say first and foremost is I often hear that they're stupid.
Okay.
You know,
yeah. Well, Yeah, I've heard that about a lot of fish. Most of the time, that's very wrong. Yeah.
Right. And the fact of the matter is they're less aggressive than a lot of fish. And so,
Which is true, right?
That's true. They don't chase their food.
Right.
You don't get a lot of reaction strikes. Stupid, maybe in the eye of the beholder there. So I use a lot of live bait, slow down. I think there's also kind of a perception that I hear a lot of times that suckers might be invasive. That's generally not true. They haven't been spread around. And then I also hear that they, maybe damage other things or they're a sign of bad water quality, which is also not true.
Right. Similar arguments to things like common carp.
Right. And so it's like those sort of things. It's like if you have a good population of suckers in your river, you probably have pretty good habitat. They need clean gravel, just like most other fish. And so if you want to like trick a fish that's not going to chase a spinner or a spoon,
sure,
it's a fun challenge.
Yeah, and to back up on that, so basically what I'm hearing you saying is if you have a creek or tributary, whatever it may be, if you have a strong sucker population, I think it's fair to say that some people might, creep up on a creek or somewhere they haven't fished before and see an abundance of suckers and going, well, this is junk water. It's full of nothing but suckers. When in actuality, that sort of points to overall health of that ecosystem. You want a strong sucker population to benefit, I guess we could say, the fish that you want, the smallmouth or trout or whatever it may be.
Yep. No, they're doing more research right now. They're equating suckers to the same way that salmon help out ecosystems by bringing in nutrients and stuff like that.
Sure.
So that's just we're studying that for the first time. But yeah, they help habitat. Other fish eat their eggs. And so, they're just a net positive, and you can catch them.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about catching them, because here I think this is relatable to a lot of people. Before I met you, I never seriously focused on sucker fishing, but I've certainly over the years wound up on a lot of trout streams and smallmouth streams where like you just come up on this shallow hole and it's just gobs of them. I mean, they are just laid up everywhere. And even though that might not be what you came for, it's hard to look at these fish, some of which are some of them are bigger than the trout that I'm probably going to catch in the same stream. And like, you're just tempted. You sort of like, you have to try. And because they just sort of lay there a lot, they don't move around a lot. Like your gut instinct is to take whatever you have, whether that's a fly or a jig or a mealworm, whatever you're using, and just like bounce it off of their nose. Like, I'm just going to bounce this thing right to the face of these laid up suckers. And he's stupid, like you say, and he's going to grab it and it's off to the races. That is not how this works out. So fair to say, the like stalk and bounce thing, that is not the number one approach, but there is a time and a place when that can work, right?
Yeah. No, and I love to wade, and I usually and sight fish for them if you've got clear water and a wadable stream. And that's a fun game, and you can learn a lot doing that, because you can watch them, how they react to a bait. And in that case, you want to have a sinker that is heavy enough you can hit the bottom, but you got to cast far enough upstream not to spook them.
Right.
Being able to change your sinker can really help you get that dialed in. So I use a sinker slide so I can change my sinker weight. If you're casting too far upstream, it can be really hard to get it to land where you want it.
Right.
And if your sinker's too heavy, now you're casting too close to the fish, bonking them on the head and spooking them.
Okay. But I think to back up for a second before we get into like how you rig and the weight system, basically I feel like what I see people do and what I've even done is you take what you have and you kind of drift it past its face. In other words, you're not necessarily trying to get something to land and stick to the bottom in front of the fish. It's just like you have this instinct of like, well, it's like a trout. So if this mealworm drifts right over his head or right past his head, he's going to come up and eat that. That is not how suckers feed though, right?
No, they're gonna be eating something, and they'll nose around rocks and things like that. And if you sit and watch them, you'll realize that they'll hold in one place and they can kind of graze or poke around. And so you want your bait to land in front of them and sit there for a minute or two. And sometimes then you just see that nose start to work, almost like a cartoon hound dog.
Yeah.
And like that, then you're on. Don't move. Don't do anything.
Right.
Like just let it. It'll find it.
Well, and I remember when I was fishing with you, I was really hoping to catch one on fly. Now that's a whole different topic that we're not going to touch on today, but it is possible because like crayfish, as an example, like they will eat a crayfish. And we had some pretty tough conditions, some pretty dirty water. So sight fishing opportunities were not that many, but I had one or two in one of the spots that we fished. And I remember you saying, okay, like if you have a weighted fly, or whether it be a nymph or a crayfish, whatever it may be, okay, then you are going to drop that and try and bounce it right in front of his face. But generally speaking, correct me if I'm wrong, the reaction to that approach, if you're going to plunk something right down in front of him, it is either going to scarf it up instantly and sort of go a little bit predatory on you, or you've blown it and it's gone.
Yeah, I remember that one ignoring you completely.
Very much. Completely ignored. I didn't have a prayer, no.
Didn't even do you the decency of leaving.
No.
It wasn't even like, I'm not even
spook.
scared.
He just ignored it. Yeah, I just bounced it right in front of his nose. He had nothing to do with it, yeah.
Yeah, no, and yeah, I tend to find that if they're laid up like that one was in some kind of calmer water, they're not as aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And, given the conditions we had, that was about the only fish you could get a fly down to.
Sure.
Because the other ones, the water was ripping.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was kind of, if they're in a neutral mood like that, even bait won't always move them.
Right. But I will say this. I mean, even though I didn't have very much opportunity to do the sight fishing thing, I could see myself getting addicted to that with better conditions, because I like to fly fish for carp. And, people poo-poo carp the way they do suckers. We'll talk about that a little more later. But I mean, it's very challenging. I mean, they are very particular about what they eat. And the trick to sight fishing carp on a fly, I imagine similarly to suckers, is you've got to have lots of shots. If you're going to spend all day to get 2 shots, good luck. It's sort of like the more shots you get, the more the law of averages would dictate that eventually you're going to get in front of one that wants to eat it. But the sight fishing deal is really not what you primarily do. So talk about fishing them a little bit more blind, what you're looking for in a little bit deeper water, and how you rig.
Yeah. So I do a lot of fishing blind. I live next to the Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing to do is to find some rocks. A good rock bar with current going over it is like a key. If you find rocks, you're going to find some suckers.
So
there.
When you say rock bar, I mean, are you looking for basically sort of like a uniform bottom versus like going to a deep hole like you might for smallmouth or something? Like you like shallower water for this?
Yeah, like where the rocks come up and they're like really clean swept by the current, like the fast current part of the break.
Okay.
Is generally where you're going to find those actively feeding fish. I tend to find, like that current break's a great place for predators, but we're looking for the ones that they feed on.
Sure. Yeah,
that
exactly.
they want to ambush. So those current, like those rock bars, riffles, gravel bars, and then I always use a slip sinker rig. I like sinker slides so that I can change out my weight as needed.
Mm-hmm.
But it's Slinky sinker rig.
Yeah, let's explain what that is a little bit, because if you're a steelheader, you know what a slinky sinker is. If you're not, you may not know. It's very functional.
Yeah, and a slinky sinker is like a piece of paracord or rope that is loaded down with buckshot.
Mm-hmm.
I usually use about 1 ounce ones. That's 8 buckshot, double out buckshot.
Mm-hmm.
I generally make them at least a half an ounce up to 1.5 ounces.
Mm-hmm.
And if I need more weight than that, I go to like a pencil trolling sinker or like an oversized drop shot sinker.
Yeah.
I really recommend avoiding anything that has a wedge shape. No bullet sinkers, casting sinkers.
Sure.
If it's got a wedge shape, it will wedge in the rocks and you won't get it back. Put that on a sinker slide so you can change the weight easily, about a 1 foot leader. And here's the key thing. A number 8 hook.
Oh, very specific. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah, you can use any size hook you want as long as it's number 8.
Circles or J's?
I usually use circles, but a J hook can also work just fine. A lot of carp hooks work well, and those are kind of like a scud. I don't know what shape you'd even call those. Like they're shaped like a scud hook.
We'll be right back after this short break. To step back to talking about the importance of your bait staying motionless on the bottom for maximum success. When I fished with you and you presented me with this rig and I see a 1 ounce Slinky weight, okay, I was like, is he kidding? We're fishing this tiny little creek. Like, I just, you think like, oh, we're going to do this with a couple split shot. We're going to put some bait on here. We're going to put a couple split shots on there. We're going to bounce it through the thing and we're going to get it in front of the suckers and they're going to eat it. And I was taken aback by how much weight you use. But then once I saw the process, I understood. And a slinky weight, of course, is malleable is the wrong word. It's bendable. So what they'll do is they're coming downstream through those rocks, right? They'll hit a rock and they'll mold around it. They'll bend around the rock. So they don't get hung up easily, but they grip extra hard. And even though that much weight might seem like overkill for this style of fishing, it's incredibly functional. Like it's a huge, important part of the program, right?
Well, and like that first day, you may have looked at those and thought those sinkers were oversized. And what do? We went home that night. We made 1.5 ounce sinkers.
Right. We needed more. Yes.
Yeah,
because the river was up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
And like you couldn't get a bait to hold anywhere. So yeah, when I'm fishing the Mississippi, I usually just start with a 1 ounce sinker. If I cast too far out, the line acts like a sail, and my bait goes all the way back down to the bank.
Sure.
And so you kind of have to balance. I like to cast upstream and let that bait kind of fall. And here's a key tip: put your line on the finger. Close your bail as soon as you're done casting. Put your finger on the line, and you want to feel that sinker hit the bottom.
Okay.
If you can feel that sinker hit the bottom, you're going to be able to feel a bite.
Right.
And if you don't, then you don't have enough weight on, or you cast too far out, you have too much line out.
Gotcha. Okay. So tight line no matter what, on top of staying stationary down on the bottom.
Yep. And that's how you can tell. And then if you don't get a bite in a minute or 2 or 5 or whenever, depending on how many kids you've got running around or how many lines you're running.
And this is a great style of fishing for kids. Tyler takes his kids sucker fishing all the time.
Yeah. Then you have a slinky sinker that's not going to get snagged easily. You can just give it a pop and feel it tap, roll down a little bit and let it sit again.
Right.
You don't even have to necessarily recast. And if you're really dialed in, you'll kind of pay attention to where in this arc you're getting bites, right? Like,
got it.
And then you can repeat it so that like you don't wait so long for the next one.
Got it. That makes sense. So how much, if you're new to this, right, how much stock do you put in visual cues? Like even if you're not in a pool where you can clearly see a bunch of suckers laid up on the bottom, if you're in the right kind of water, a little bit faster water, these rock bars you're talking about, you will see these fish flashing around. It's very common. Does that indicate that those are active feeding fish within that lane?
100%.
Yeah.
I don't leave home without polarized glasses. For sure.
Yeah.
And like there's 2 places to fish. There's places if you're seeing fish or places where you can't see the bottom.
Right.
If you stand there for a couple minutes and you're looking at something that looks good at habitat or you're looking at a pool where you can see the bottom, like if you don't see fish, leave.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to like show up for you. You're better off moving.
Right. Okay. So, that makes sense too. So let's talk baits again, to back up. Like I think to sort of simplify it a little bit. I mean, the key to this, the key to being successful with suckers is putting a bait out there and you are letting the suckers come to them. You're not trying to hit them in the head. You're just like any other fishing, bait fishing. You're picking a prime location based on what you see, what you know from the last trip, whatever it may be. But you will do better in the long run putting a bait where you know suckers are and letting them find that bait rather than trying to hit them on the head. So let's talk baits. The primary one is
worms.
Plain old garden worms, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Night crawlers. I usually go with night crawlers, half a night crawler, and fresh night crawlers.
Okay.
Like an ice pack in your night crawler cooler is a good investment.
Sure.
If your night crawlers get soft, mushy, they're not alive anymore.
Yeah.
They will not scavenge.
And it's amazing how quickly that happens. I just had my son out fishing a creek the other day, and we had a fresh, cold styrofoam container of worms, and I'm like, they'll be fine for a couple hours. No, they are not. They mush out very, very quickly.
I swear in the summer, even just getting into a hot car, they can die before the air conditioner cools them off.
Yeah. Do you buy worms in bulk, Tyler? You always have a worm supply on you, don't you?
Yeah, 6 dozen at a time or so.
Yeah, there you
get
go.
A deal if you buy 6 dozen.
There you go. Okay, so then that makes this even easier. Okay, so there's nothing special you need here. It's not like carp fishing where guys get involved in all these pack baits and boilies and all these specialty baits. But are there things, because I've seen you fish some other things that I want to talk about. So are there things that give you an edge scent-wise? Like, and as an example, like I've seen you fish mussels from the grocery store.
I have used mussels, and that's like a specialty approach for those really big suckers.
Okay.
The really big suckers oftentimes eat mussels. Well, you
The
can't.
freshwater mussels, right. Yeah.
Yep.
They're protected.
Yep. You can't harvest freshwater mussels for your own bait. So you can use mussels from the grocery store.
Okay.
But then you're really targeting those 24-inch plus suckers.
Sure. So if you want to up your game and sort of pass on numbers and go for quality, you might try mussels. But like Tyler said, in a lot of rivers, even where I live, there's plenty of freshwater mussels. And people don't realize this, but they are protected in many areas. In the Delaware where I live, you cannot mess with the freshwater mussels.
In some places in Minnesota, you can't even harvest empty shells.
Really? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Another really good bait actually is crawfish tails or a dead crawfish. I always cut the head off a crawfish or crayfish so that it doesn't crawl under a rock while it's hooked.
Sure.
And I guess it's also important to say with either a crayfish or worms, you're going to catch a lot of fish, a lot of different fish.
And I'm glad you brought that up because one of the things that stuck with me the most, I'll never forget this. I was fishing the Mississippi with Tyler right near his house. And here we are, just a couple of guys. Tyler's the king of forked sticks, by the way. Like, you don't get new forked sticks when you go. You whittle them, and they're beautiful, and you always have the same set of forked sticks on you. So here we are, just two guys in this spot that to the average Joe angler would kind of look like nothing special. It's just a big, long, glassy, flat run, pretty wide open. No huge boulders or dips or whitewater or anything. And we're just two guys sitting on worms waiting for suckers, and you were getting so upset because I just kept catching one big smallmouth after another. And my thought, we Tyler and I joke about it all the time, is like, man, all the effort and all the lures I put into catching smallmouth this size, maybe I should just spend a lot more time soaking a worm dead on the bottom. So you do have other opportunities with this, yeah.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, too, we were casting out where the boats were floating.
Yes.
So we were catching the smallmouth that, who knows, if those things stayed in the middle of the river, they never even saw lures.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, it was incredible. So, I mean, just this style of fishing alone sort of plays into that idea of like sort of the mystery creek. Like, yeah, you might be going for suckers, but there's potential to catch so many other things. So the mussels deal, is that because the larger red horse where you live actually have a mouth big enough to suck up a mussel and crack it? Is that why that appeals to the bigger ones mainly?
Yeah, have special adaptations. They have a really big mouth, and they actually have crushing teeth in their throat. They can actually crush mussel shells.
Sure.
And in that particular spot, I was looking for a bait that would get past the bass.
Right.
Because they were eating so many
right.
worms.
The smallmouth don't want anything to do with the mussels, the grocery store mussels.
Yep.
Is this a year-round thing?
No, and maybe it is in some places. You can start off the season with white suckers, and they will bite as soon as the ice starts to melt off the lakes right where the creek comes in. So I'll be catching suckers while some people are still ice fishing. That's how I marked the beginning of spring.
Right.
And then it'll go up to early November if the fish get a little more sluggish, and they do migrate up and downstream. So you might find in the fall that you have to like go further downstream to like a wintering spot.
Sure.
But yeah, I know even here we've caught red horse out of the Mississippi November 1st.
Yeah. And obviously that's gonna vary by location. But if you sort of had to blanket cover the Midwest, like best time of year, or maybe your favorite time of year.
Probably May, early May, late April.
Yeah.
The magic thing, water temp of 50 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh, that's everything, man. That's the shad here. All good things seem to happen at 50 degrees, no matter what you are talking about.
Yeah, that's not even a sucker fishing tip. That's just a
fishing tip. That's a life tip. If it's 50 degrees, you can make something happen for sure.
Yeah.
So
don't be painting your house or anything.
Yeah.
Go fishing.
So I brought up the similarity to carp, at least on the fly side, but I'm just curious, right? Because carp, as many people know, some may not. I mean, they're maybe even more ubiquitous than suckers in this country, that we've just sort of adopted them as this thing that exists here, when in reality, common carp are invasive here. They are not supposed to be here. Yet, so much bigger of a culture, both on the fly side and with European tackle, has grown around common carp. Why do they get the love? Why has a scene, in your opinion, not grown up around suckers? To me, they are just as interesting and challenging as common carp, if not more.
That's an excellent question. It might be just the maximum size.
Yeah.
That like there is always the possibility of like a 20, 30 pound carp exists.
Yeah.
That might be it. And carp do fight really hard.
Yeah.
I used to do a lot more carp fishing myself, and part of maybe the thing in the Mississippi, my house catch probably 20. We probably catch 20 suckers to the one carp. So we love to appreciate what we've got.
Yeah, and that's really what this is about, and what you do. Your love of native fish suckers is appreciating what you've got, and I fully understand that. So let's close out with this, man. Has there ever been a time that you've talked to somebody about this, maybe somebody interested, and you sort of help them along, where you got the payout of the story that was like, holy crap, I did what you said, and like now I'm addicted, and look at this sucker.
I have had many of those stories from my social media followers and that always feels great when you get tagged in a photo, and especially if it's a kid with a big fish. I've also had it at the park. I remember one guy, he was coming back from the river, and I looked at his I'm like, oh, you're catfishing. He got like 2-aught circle hooks.
Sure.
And he's like, oh no, I'm just like carp fishing on the river. And I'm like, buddy, number 8 hooks.
Right.
I saw him a week later, and he was like, I just had the best day fishing of my entire life.
Yeah. There you go.
Number 8 hooks, 1-ounce sinkers, throw it in the fast water, especially if it's a place you never fished because you thought it was snaggy.
Yeah.
Do it.
There you go. And hang on if it happens. I can attest to that. Set your drag light. Believe me when I tell you, Tyler is as passionate about sharing information about sucker fishing as he is actually catching them. So if you've got any juicy sucker questions, you can find him on Instagram at buffalo_catcher. And if you care at all about the preservation of native fish, please check out Native Fish for Tomorrow. They are not just focused on native fish issues in Minnesota. They care about them across the entire country and are doing great work. Now, real talk for a sec. I understand that not many of you are going to become overnight sucker addicts because of this episode. I get it. I haven't become one since I fished with Tyler, but I did gain a new appreciation for these fish and realize that they shouldn't be overlooked, especially if you live in a heavily populated area where the waters get a lot of pressure like I do, and you're looking for a little solitude and a new challenge. So if this episode inspires you to get after some summer suckers, let me know. You can reach me at quickstrikepodcast@gmail.com, which is also the place to send along any ideas for topics you'd love to hear on future episodes. You can find me on Instagram at Joe Cermele138. Big thanks to engineer Mike Pederson of 85 Audio for making Quick Strike sound so good. And if you want to hear more from me, you can always find me on my weekly long-form show, Cut and Retie, wherever you listen to podcasts.